January 1943. The Pacific air hangs heavy with moisture and rot. Dawn arrives without color, just a pale gray pressing against the jungle canopy. Somewhere ahead, a rifle cracks once sharp, deliberate, and then the forest goes still again. An American Marine lies flat against the earth, unmoving. Mud stains his sleeves. Ants crawl across the back of his hand. He does not react. His cheek rests against a rifle stock that does not belong to the US government. It was not issued. It was ordered through a catalog, paid for in cash. Mocked openly when he first carried it into camp. Around him, men whisper about Japanese snipers in the trees, about Marines shot through helmet slits, about sentries killed without ever seeing the enemy. For days, this sector has been pinned down by invisible fire. The Marine inhales slowly. He has already been here for hours. He is not waiting for movement. He is waiting for certainty. By the end of 4 days, 11 Japanese snipers will be dead, and no one will laugh at the rifle again. To understand how this moment came to pass, the war itself and the kind of battlefield the Pacific had become must come into focus. By the time American forces reached the Central Pacific, the war had already taught its hardest lesson. This was not Europe. There were no hedgerows, no long sight lines, no open fields where formations could be seen and measured. The Pacific War was fought in fragments, small clearings, narrow ridge lines, stretches of jungle so dense that sunlight barely reached the ground. It was a war of proximity and concealment, where the enemy was rarely visible and almost always close. After Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Japan expanded rapidly across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. By mid-1942, American and Allied forces were fighting to halt that expansion island by island. Guadalcanal, Buna Tarawa, New Britain. Each name carried a pattern of brutal repetition: heat, disease, exhaustion, an enemy that refused to fight in predictable ways. Among the most feared elements of Japanese ground resistance was the sniper. Japanese Army doctrine placed enormous value on individual fieldcraft. Soldiers were trained to operate independently, to endure isolation, hunger, and discomfort without complaint. Snipers, in particular, were selected for patience and discipline. They were taught to remain motionless for hours or days, to blend into trees, roots, and earthworks so completely that detection became nearly impossible. In the jungle, where sound carried unpredictably and visibility was often measured in yards, this made them lethal beyond their numbers. American Marines encountered this threat early. On Guadalcanal in 1942, Japanese snipers learned quickly that tree lines, palm trunks, and elevated platforms offered commanding views over Marine positions. Some lashed themselves to branches, others hollowed out trees and waited inside them. Shots came from above, from behind, from angles that defied instinct. A single well-placed sniper could paralyze an entire platoon, freezing movement and draining morale. The psychological effect was profound. Marines could accept artillery. They could brace for machine gun fire. But a single rifle, shot sudden, precise, and unseen, created a different kind of fear. Men hesitated to raise their heads. Patrols slowed. Sentries became targets. The US Marine Corps, for all its toughness, entered the war without a fully developed sniper doctrine suited to this environment. Pre-war training emphasized marksmanship, but not sustained counter-sniper operations in jungle terrain. Specialized sniper units would eventually emerge. But in the early and middle years of the Pacific War, much of the counter-sniper fight was improvised. It fell to individual Marines, often those with civilian hunting backgrounds, to adapt faster than official manuals could. Weapons added another complication. Standard-issue rifles were accurate, but not always optimized for the conditions. Jungle humidity warped wood stocks. Optics fogged or failed. Supply lines stretched thousands of miles, and replacements arrived slowly. In this environment, survival often depended less on regulation and more on ingenuity. By 1943 and into 1944, as American forces pushed deeper into Japanese-held territory, sniping became a constant, grinding duel. Every advance triggered retaliation. Every pause invited fire. The battlefield rewarded patience, precision, and the ability to see what others missed. And somewhere within this larger struggle, one Marine prepared to fight a very personal war. Armed with a rifle few believed belonged there at all. The rifle was the first thing they noticed. Not because it looked dangerous, but because it looked out of place. In the US Marine Corps, weapons carried authority. The M1903 Springfield, with its long barrel and iron discipline, was a symbol of standardization and trust. It had been tested, approved, stamped, and issued. To carry something else was to quietly challenge the system. And in wartime, that kind of deviation rarely drew admiration. Yet in the Pacific, necessity eroded tradition. Officially, Marines were expected to rely on issued equipment. Unofficially, shortages, delays, and battlefield realities told a different story. Optical sights were scarce. Many units went into combat without enough scoped rifles to support true sniper operations. When scopes did arrive, they were often fragile, poorly sealed against moisture, or mismatched to rifles. A cracked lens or fogged optic could render a marksman blind at the worst possible moment. Some Marines had grown up far from parade grounds and drill fields. They came from rural America, from hunting cabins and open ranges, where marksmanship was learned not on paper targets, but on moving animals in unpredictable terrain. Before the war, civilian firearms culture in the United States was vast and accessible. Mail-order catalogs offered precision rifles, custom barrels, and optical sights to anyone with enough money and patience. Companies like Winchester, Remington, and smaller specialty manufacturers sold accurate sporting rifles designed for long hours in the field. When the war came, a handful of Marines quietly brought that experience with them. The rifle in question had been ordered before deployment. It was not illegal, but it was unconventional. A civilian hunting rifle, tuned for accuracy rather than regulation. Its scope was simple, rugged, and familiar to its owner. While others struggled with issued optics they barely knew how to maintain, this Marine trusted his own equipment completely. He had spent years learning its balance, its recoil, its behavior in bad weather. To his peers, it looked like arrogance, or worse, cowboy thinking. A mail-order rifle had no place, they said, in a professional army. Some joked about it openly. Others assumed it would fail the moment real combat tested it. Leadership was cautious. Officers were trained to enforce uniformity for good reason. Standardization simplified logistics, maintenance, and accountability. Allowing personal weapons raised questions about ammunition compatibility, repair, and precedent. But wartime reality forced compromises. If a Marine could prove effectiveness, especially in a role as specialized and desperate as counter-sniping, regulations sometimes bent. The battlefield itself made the argument. Japanese snipers were not impressed by rank or regulation. They exploited hesitation. They punished predictability. And they were patient enough to wait out entire days for a single opportunity. In response, Marines learned that counter-sniping required more than marksmanship. It required familiarity with terrain, light, sound, and human behavior. It required stillness. And above all, it required confidence, absolute confidence in one's weapon. By the time this Marine was assigned to the contested sector, Japanese sniper activity had already taken lives. Patrol routes had narrowed. Movement had slowed to a crawl. Men spoke in whispers. Helmets were pulled low. Every rustle of leaves was suspect. The rifle was still mocked, quietly now. But the jungle did not care what anyone thought. As the tension tightened, the fight would soon be reduced to individuals, one shooter against another, hidden in the foliage, testing patience, endurance, and nerve. The stage was set for a duel that would unfold from multiple angles at once. Before he was a Marine, he was a hunter. Not in the romantic sense, but in the practical one. Early mornings, long waits, cold hands wrapped around a rifle stock while the world remained still. He learned patience long before he learned drill commands. In hunting, success was not measured by movement, but by restraint, by knowing when not to act. That discipline transferred seamlessly to the jungle. While others shifted, scratched, adjusted their weight, he stayed still. Hours passed without complaint. Pain was acknowledged, then ignored. Hunger was background noise. Fear existed, but it was controlled. In sniper work, emotional spikes were liabilities. The isolation was the hardest part. Unlike infantry assaults, sniping offered no shared momentum, no shouted commands. It was solitary work conducted yards or sometimes hundreds of yards from friendly positions. The kills were quiet, a single trigger pull, no immediate confirmation, just the knowledge that somewhere a threat had ended. He did not speak much about it. Marines who served alongside him later noted that he did not celebrate success. There was no boasting. Each confirmed enemy sniper meant fewer friendly casualties. That was enough. But human endurance has limits. Remaining motionless while insects crawled freely, while sweat soaked through uniforms, while the knowledge of being hunted pressed constantly at the back of the mind, Japanese snipers were skilled. They studied American patterns. They waited for counter-snipers to reveal themselves. This was not a sport. It was a duel where the penalty for error was immediate death, and he understood that completely. Counter-sniping in the Pacific was less about reaction and more about anticipation. Japanese snipers rarely fired twice from the same position. A single shot would be followed by silence, movement, relocation. They exploited elevation, especially trees, where angles distorted sound and made return fire nearly impossible. Marines learned quickly that firing back blindly was useless and dangerous. The Marine with the civilian rifle employed a different approach. He observed patterns. Japanese snipers favored certain terrain features: dead trees with wide trunks, broken palms near trails, slight rises overlooking water points. They also favored timing early morning and late afternoon, when shifting light masked movement. Instead of scanning constantly, he fixed his attention on likely positions and waited, sometimes for entire days. When a shot rang out elsewhere, he did not flinch. He watched for the second-order effects: disturbed leaves, birds suddenly scattering, a slight unnatural stillness in the canopy. He also used bait without calling it that. Deliberate exposure of equipment, subtle movement near known paths, not reckless, but calculated. Japanese snipers were disciplined, but they were still human. They sought confirmation. They wanted certainty before firing. That moment of confirmation was what he waited for. When he fired, it was once, never rushed, never followed by celebration. Immediately after, he shifted position, even if he believed the kill was clean. Survival depended on denying the enemy predictability. In the jungle, patience was ammunition, and he carried it in abundance. The rifle was simple. That was its strength. Unlike some issued weapons adapted hurriedly for sniping, this rifle had been built from the ground up for precision. The barrel was heavier, reducing vibration. The trigger had been tuned for a clean break. The scope was modest in magnification, but reliable, sealed against moisture, resistant to fogging, and familiar to the man behind it. It did not look impressive. It did not carry military markings. That was part of the ridicule. But in the jungle, function mattered more than pedigree. The ammunition matched the rifle perfectly. Ballistics were predictable. Drop was known. Wind drift, minimal under canopy, was easily accounted for. While others struggled with misaligned optics or shifting zero, this rifle held true shot after shot. Most importantly, the Marine trusted it completely. That trust eliminated hesitation. When the moment came, there was no doubt, no second-guessing of equipment, only execution. In counter-sniper warfare, confidence was as lethal as accuracy. By the time the first confirmed kills occurred, the jokes had already stopped. But the true test, the 4-day hunt, was still ahead. The Japanese sniper was not an improvisation. He was a product of deliberate training and cultural expectation. Imperial Japanese Army doctrine emphasized endurance and concealment. Snipers were taught that survival itself was secondary to mission completion. Remaining in position for days without food or water was not extraordinary, it was expected. Camouflage went beyond uniforms. Mud, foliage, bark, and rope were used to erase human outlines. Some snipers wrapped themselves directly in trees to prevent falling asleep and losing position. They understood the jungle intimately. Where Western troops saw chaos, Japanese soldiers saw structure. Trails of ants indicated movement corridors. Broken branches told stories. Silence itself was a signal. They learned to fire only when success was nearly guaranteed, knowing that a single shot could stall entire units. Japanese snipers also studied American behavior. They noted when Marines smoked, when they relieved sentries, when helmets dipped just enough to expose flesh. Counter-snipers were treated as priority targets. If one was suspected, the response was careful and lethal. Traps were laid. False positions were used. Shots were fired deliberately to draw return fire. This meant that every engagement was layered. When an American sniper fired, he had to assume he was already being watched. During the 4-day period to come, the Japanese would not retreat blindly. Each loss would sharpen their caution. Each silence would be intentional. The contest would be as much mental as physical. At first, leadership observed quietly. Officers knew the sniper threat had to be addressed. Patrols were bleeding casualties in small but persistent numbers. Medical evacuations were constant. Progress stalled. Yet placing too much faith in a single Marine, especially one using non-standard equipment, was risky. Kill confirmations were difficult. Jungle combat obscured bodies. A fallen enemy might never be recovered. Reports had to rely on observation, secondary effects, and the sudden absence of fire from known positions. Commanders demanded caution. Claims required corroboration, but results accumulate, even without paperwork. After the first day, the sector grew quieter. After the second, patrols reported fewer near misses. By the third, Japanese sniper fire had become sporadic, rather than constant. Officers did not praise the rifle. They did not openly endorse it, but they stopped questioning the man carrying it. Orders shifted subtly. He was given priority access to observation points. Runners ensured his reports reached command quickly. When he requested time, he was granted it. In war, effectiveness becomes its own authority. Each confirmed kill carried weight. The Marine understood that the men he targeted were skilled, disciplined, and deadly, but also human. They waited, just as he did. They endured, just as he did. The difference was allegiance. There was no hatred in the work, only necessity. For the unit, the effect was transformative. Fear receded, not vanished but managed. Marines began to move again. Heads lifted. Patrols stretched routes slightly farther. Confidence returned, not because the enemy was weak, but because someone was finally meeting him on equal terms. Psychologically, the balance shifted. The jungle no longer belonged entirely to the unseen riflemen in the trees. It was contested once more. As the fourth day approached, both sides understood what was happening. The Japanese knew a counter-sniper was operating with lethal precision. The Marine knew that the enemy would adapt, becoming more cautious, more dangerous. The final phase would decide whether patience or pressure would prevail. Moisture clung to everything: uniforms, rifle metal, skin. Visibility was limited, not by darkness, but by layers of foliage that filtered what little light there was. The Marine moved into position while the jungle was still quiet, careful not to disturb leaves or snap twigs. Every step was deliberate, every pause is intentional. By mid-morning the first shot came. It was not aimed at him. A Japanese sniper fired at a Marine patrol moving along a shallow trail to the east. The sound was sharp, elevated. The Marine did not look toward the noise immediately. He waited, counted seconds, watched for reaction. A sudden shift of leaves high in a dead palm gave it a weight too subtle for most eyes, but enough. The distance was long but manageable. He adjusted once, breathed out, fired. The shot echoed briefly, then dissolved into the jungle. There was no scream, no movement, only the knowledge that the angle of fire from that tree would never be used again. Within hours, another shot rang out closer this time. Japanese snipers were probing, testing. They wanted to locate him. He changed positions after every engagement, crawling slowly, inch by inch, to new concealment. He drank little, ate nothing. By late afternoon, 2 enemy snipers were confirmed, neutralized, not by body count, but by absence. Entire sections of the canopy went silent. Patrols passed without contact. The second day was harder. The Japanese adapted quickly. They stopped firing indiscriminately. Shots came only after long delays, from deeper concealment. One sniper used a false position fire from a concealed ground-level hide, while a tree position drew attention. It was well executed. The Marine waited nearly 6 hours before firing that day. When he did, it was because of something almost invisible, a slight shimmer in the air where sunlight caught the edge of a scope lens. One shot, then immediate relocation. By nightfall of the second day, 5 Japanese snipers were believed eliminated. The jungle, however, was not yielding easily. Each remaining enemy marksman became more cautious, more patient. The third and fourth days would demand even more restraint. The absence of constant sniper fire did not mean safety. It meant calculation. The remaining Japanese marksmen had learned what was happening. They understood that someone was dismantling their network deliberately, one position at a time, and they knew that impatience would be fatal. The Marine adjusted accordingly. He reduced movement to the bare minimum. He chose positions not for visibility, but for endurance. Places where he could remain for an entire day without shifting his weight, where his silhouette dissolved naturally into shadow and growth. Late that morning, a single shot cracked from deep within the foliage, deliberate, isolated. A Marine farther down the line was wounded, but not killed. The shot was meant to provoke, to draw response. The Marine did not fire. He waited. Nearly an hour passed before the mistake revealed itself. A branch bent slightly against the wind's pattern, not broken, not shaken, just wrong. He followed the line of sight slowly, methodically, tracing where a shooter would need to be to see the wounded Marine. The distance was extreme. The shot required absolute certainty. He took it. The rifle recoiled once, clean and controlled. He did not wait to observe. He moved immediately, rolling into a depression in the earth, then crawling deeper into cover. Minutes later, return fire cut into his previous position. Leaves shredded. Bark splintered. The Japanese had triangulated, but too late. By nightfall, 8 enemy snipers were gone. The 4th day was the most dangerous. The remaining Japanese marksmen had stopped firing altogether. Silence returned, but it was not peace. It was a standoff. Both sides understood that the next shot would decide who controlled this sector of jungle. The Marine chose patience over pressure. He remained still from before dawn until late afternoon, muscles cramped, vision blurred. He blinked slowly to avoid giving himself away. Then, just before dusk, movement. A Japanese sniper attempted relocation under the fading light, assuming the American would be exhausted. The Marine caught it, not the body, but the effect of movement on foliage, a shift that did not belong to the wind. One shot. Moments later, another. A second sniper, attempting to respond too quickly, revealing his position through urgency rather than discipline. As darkness settled, the jungle fell completely silent. By the end of the 4th day, 11 Japanese snipers were confirmed neutralized through observation, intercepted fire, and the sudden collapse of enemy activity across the sector. Patrols moved freely for the first time in weeks. No shots followed them. No unseen eyes tracked their progress. The rifle was no longer mentioned as a curiosity. The killing had stopped. But the consequences were only beginning to unfold. Within hours, patrols adjusted their routes. Marines moved without the constant instinct to hunch forward or scan treetops at every step. The jungle, which had felt claustrophobic and hostile, loosened its grip slightly. It was still dangerous, but no longer dominated by unseen rifle fire. Casualty reports told the story plainly. In the days following the 4-day counter-sniper operation, sniper-related injuries in that sector dropped sharply. Medics saw fewer head wounds, fewer sudden collapses on the trail. Evacuation requests slowed. Movement became possible again, which in jungle warfare was often the difference between progress and paralysis. Officers compiled after-action observations rather than formal commendations. This was not a battle with a name or a map reference that would appear in headlines. It was a quiet correction in the balance of control. Japanese forces in the area were forced to reposition, abandoning effective sniper nests that had taken weeks to prepare. The Marine with the civilian rifle was not elevated to mythic status. There were no speeches, no medals presented on the spot, but his role was acknowledged in subtle ways. He was consulted before patrol movements. His assessments of terrain were given weight. Younger Marines watched how he moved, how he waited, how he used stillness as a weapon. Leadership attitudes shifted as well. The skepticism toward non-standard equipment softened, not because doctrine had changed, but because reality had asserted itself. Officers understood that regulation did not guarantee effectiveness, especially in environments as unforgiving as the Pacific jungle. The rifle itself drew less attention now. It was simply a tool that worked. Ammunition supply was quietly adjusted to ensure compatibility. No one joked about catalogs anymore, yet the aftermath extended beyond numbers and logistics. The psychological shift was just as important. Marines who had lived under constant sniper threat felt something rare in combat relief. Not safety, but breathing room. The sense that the enemy could be found, that patience and skill could reclaim ground inch by inch. The jungle remained contested. Other sectors still bled, other snipers still hunted. But in this stretch of earth, the balance had tipped, and that balance would influence how the war was fought from then on. Word traveled the way it always did in combat, quietly, unevenly, carried by men rather than paperwork. Other units heard that a sniper problem had been handled. Not by artillery, not by massed assault, but by one Marine, operating deliberately, patiently, with a rifle that had never passed through an armory. The story was not told as legend. It was told as instruction. In the weeks that followed, attitudes toward sniping shifted across the theater. Commanders paid closer attention to counter-sniper reports. Observation posts were prioritized. Marines with proven marksmanship backgrounds were identified earlier and used more deliberately. Sniping was no longer treated as an occasional task, it was recognized as a persistent requirement of jungle warfare. Equipment policy did not change overnight. The Marine Corps remained an institution built on standardization, but within that structure, flexibility expanded, field modifications were tolerated, scoped rifles were allocated more carefully. The importance of reliable optics in humid environments became impossible to ignore. Lessons that had been learned painfully were now written into training notes and after-action reviews. For the Japanese forces, the loss of 11 trained snipers in 4 days was not easily replaced. Snipers were not interchangeable infantrymen. They required time, training, and experience. Their absence forced tactical adjustments. Japanese units became more cautious in exposed areas, relying more heavily on indirect fire and night movement. The psychological edge they had enjoyed dominating daylight hours through fear was blunted. For the Marine himself, the aftermath was quiet. He continued to serve, continued to operate where he was needed. The rifle stayed with him, worn now not just by use, but by proof. There was no formal recognition that captured the scale of what had happened. Sniper work rarely lent itself to visible heroism. Its success was measured by what did not occur: shots not fired, men not killed. When rotations came and battles shifted, the jungle reclaimed the ground. New growth covered old positions. Tree trunks splintered by bullets healed in time. But the lesson endured. War does not reward appearances. It rewards effectiveness. As the Pacific Campaign pushed onward, through new islands and new killing grounds, that truth followed every Marine who stepped into the foliage with a rifle and a long wait ahead. And long after the shooting stopped, it would remain one of the quiet realities of modern warfare. The Pacific War was not decided only by fleets or divisions. It was decided in places like this, small stretches of jungle where visibility shrank to yards and time stretched endlessly, where one rifle, one position, and one decision could alter the rhythm of an entire front. The Marine and his mail-order rifle were not symbols of rebellion or improvisation for its own sake. They were reminders of something older than doctrine. That war, stripped of ceremony, is a test of adaptability, of patience, of understanding the ground beneath your body and the limits of your own endurance. 11 Japanese snipers died in 4 days, not because they were careless, but because someone met them with equal discipline and greater restraint. There was no glory in it, only the quiet removal of danger. Only the slow return of movement and breath to men who had been pinned down by fear. History often remembers the loud moments, the landings, the charges, the explosions that reshape maps. It rarely pauses on the long silences, on the hours spent unmoving, on the men who fought by waiting rather than advancing. Yet those silences mattered. They allowed others to live, to move forward, to fight another day. In the end, the rifle was just wood and steel. The catalogue it came from, long forgotten. What endured was the lesson carried forward into every modern battlefield, that effectiveness is not granted by authority, and survival does not care how something looks. It cares only that it works. And sometimes, history turns on a single shot, fired by someone patient enough to wait for the right moment, then disappear back into the quiet.